There's approximately 10 million American adults on a GLP-1 drug right now. How is that affecting the beverage and the food industries? We're going to dive into the topic on this special edition of Beer in Front. Sometimes the beer in front of you is the best one yet. This is Beer in Front. Every week I'll talk to people in and around the beer world and get their stories all about beer. That's Beer in Front, and it's coming up now. Picture a tap room on a busy Saturday night, the kind where you'd normally cycle through 2 or 3 rounds before the bill comes. Now imagine the bartender notices something. People are just ordering one beer and they're sitting with it. They're not nursing it out of thrift, not designated driving. They're just done. One beer and they mean it. It's happening in restaurants too. Tables that used to rack up big checks are coming in at around 2/3 that amount. Not because people ordered less, they ordered the same number of courses. The appetizers are just half eaten. The bread basket goes back nearly full, and no one ordered a second round of drinks. The next time, the same customers, maybe you're just ordering the entree. If you work in food and beverage, you've probably noticed something. Sales data that doesn't quite add up, trends that don't follow the usual patterns. And if you've been paying attention to the news, you might already know what's behind it. About 10 million American adults are now taking a GLP-1 drug. Brands like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound. You see ads for them all over with celebrities like Serena Williams and Charles Barkley. These are medications first developed to treat diabetes that turned out to be extraordinarily powerful tools for weight loss and are now being taken by roughly 40 million people around the world. You've heard about what they do to waistlines. Today we're talking about what they're doing to entire industries. Here's what keeps getting missed in the coverage. GLP-1 drugs don't just make people eat less, they change what people actually want to eat. And that distinction, behavior versus desire, is why this is a much bigger story than a new weight loss drug with better marketing. I'm Dave Zalatoris. This is Beer in Front, and today we're following the money and the missing appetizers into the Ozempic economy. Let's start with a quick primer because you need to understand the mechanism to understand why this is different from every other health trend the food industry has faced. GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. It's a hormone your gut naturally produces when you eat. Its job is to tell your brain you've had enough. Under normal circumstances, it works in the background, helping regulate your appetite. GLP-1 drugs are synthetic versions of this hormone, amped up. They stay in your system far longer than the natural version, and they are remarkably good at making people feel full. The weight loss effects have been dramatic enough to make headlines for a few years now. But the more researchers have studied these drugs, the more they kept finding something they didn't expect. People on GLP-1s weren't just eating less, they were craving less. Less sugar, less junk food. And here's where it gets interesting for our story today. Less alcohol. Two mechanisms seem to be at play. The first is physical. GLP-1 drugs slow down how quickly your stomach empties. That means alcohol is absorbed more slowly, which blunts the initial buzz you would feel after a drink. Less reward for the same action. The second mechanism is neurological, and this one is striking. GLP-1 drugs appear to act on the brain's dopamine reward system, the same circuit that makes a cold beer feel satisfying on a hot summer day, or makes that second glass of wine at dinner feel like a good idea. It appears to be dialed down, not turned off, just quieter. According to Beverage Daily, as appetite suppression kicks in, share of stomach space becomes a battle, and alcohol offers empty calories, bloating, and with a GLP-1, a reduced dopamine reward, and is therefore often the first thing to be cut. Researchers published a randomized clinical trial in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2025. They gave weekly injections to adults diagnosed with alcohol use disorder, people who drank heavily and frequently. Even at a relatively low dose, participants reduced their daily drinking by 41%, and they reported significantly fewer cravings. 41% from one drug at a low dose. To put that in context, naltrexone, which is currently one of the most effective medications for alcohol use disorder, typically reduces drinking by about 20 to 25%. GLP-1s are now being studied as a potential treatment for alcoholism. That's how significant the effect appears to be. Researchers are careful to say that these are early findings. Larger trials are now underway. The mechanisms aren't fully mapped, and most of the people taking GLP-1s today are taking them for weight loss or diabetes, not alcohol treatment. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter why someone is taking the drug. The neurological effect appears to happen regardless. Let's talk about what this means for the people selling alcohol. Morgan Stanley analyzed a body of third-party research and found something remarkable: a potential 75% reduction in alcohol consumption among patients on GLP-1 drugs. That's not just drinking less per occasion, it's the product of roughly 50% fewer drinking occasions and 50% fewer drinks per occasion. And about a quarter of GLP-1 users, according to the same research, stop drinking entirely. These numbers are significant on their own, but the picture gets more complicated, more worrying for the alcohol industry when you look at who's being hit. Not all categories are suffering equally. Among GLP-1 users who cut back on drinking, wine shows the steepest decline, 52%, beer came in at 43%, spirits at around 40%. Wine users tend to be older, exactly the demographic that premium alcohol brands are chasing. The people the industry most wants to sell to are the ones pulling back the hardest. Then there's what analysts call the power law problem. Alcohol consumption in America is dramatically skewed. The top 10% of drinkers, roughly 24 million people, account for approximately half of all alcohol sold in the United States. Here's the uncomfortable question. What happens if GLP-1 adoption skews toward heavy drinkers? Because if the drug is reducing consumption by 40 to 75% among people who are already drinking at high volumes, the impact on total sales could be far more severe than the headline penetration numbers suggest. One industry consultant put it plainly: GLP-1s are the biological accelerant to an existing sober, curious moderation trend. GLP-1s now sound the death knell of the volume growth model for mainstream alcohol. Brands that were banking on session drinking are heading into a headwind that marketing alone cannot fix. That said, it's not game over for alcohol, and the smart players in the industry know that. The shift in behavior among GLP-1 users isn't just less drinking, it's more intentional drinking. Users report choosing to have one drink, a really good one, rather than three average ones. They're more sensitive to taste and quality because the buzz is no longer the point. That's going to be an opportunity for premium brands, for the craft distillery making something worth savoring, for the wine producer whose bottles tell a story, for the brewery making a great barrel aged stout, for the low or no alcohol category, which has been growing for years, just got a massive tailwind. The losers in this equation are the volume players, the brands whose entire business model depends on people having another one, the bar that makes its margin on the third round. In that model, GLP 1 adoption isn't a headwind, it's a structural problem. Now let's talk about what's happening in restaurants. In February of 2026, JP Morgan published a global research report projecting that the food and beverage industry could see between 30 and 55 billion dollars in annual revenue reduction by the early 2030s. This is attributable directly to GLP-1. 30 to 55 billion dollars a year. To understand why, consider this. 23% of US households now contain at least one GLP-1 user, according to CNBC and industry data. That's nearly 1 in 4 households. When a family with a GLP-1 user goes out to dinner, the math changes. One person orders an entree and eats half of it. Nobody sticks around for a second round of drinks. The check is smaller. And that family is going out to dinner on a regular basis. GLP-1 users aren't eating out less often, they're just spending less when they do. The impact is showing up most clearly at dinner. Industry data from 2026 shows dinner traffic fell about 6% among regular GLP-1 users. Translate that to overall restaurant sales, and it amounts to roughly 0.4% decline in total dinner revenue due to GLP-1 use. And that's only with about 1 in 8 adults currently on the medication. Fast food is taking the hardest hit. The entire economic model of fast food depends on upsizing, add-ons, meals. GLP-1 users are ordering smaller, they're finishing less, and skipping the fries. The grocery data tells a parallel story. A Cornell University study published in the Journal of Marketing Research found that within 6 months of starting a GLP-1 medication, households reduced their grocery spending by 5.3% on average. High-income households saw an even sharper drop at 8.2%. The biggest loser, savory snacks, down more than 10%. Sweets, baked goods, cookies all saw similar declines. The winners, yogurt, fresh fruit, high-protein foods. You see protein products now down most grocery aisles. High-protein pasta, frozen foods, ramen. Even Pop-Tarts has a high-protein version out now. Here's the reframe that restaurant operators need to hear. GLP-1 users aren't going away. They're going to represent more than a third of food and beverage spending by 2030. That's a massive consumer group, one with specific preferences, higher health consciousness, and often higher incomes. The restaurants that win are the ones that will adapt. Smaller portion options, high protein dishes, front and center. Menu items built around quality over quantity. Drinks worth having just one up. The restaurants that lose are the ones that will keep designing menus for appetites that, for a growing share of their customers, no longer exist. Let's zoom out for a moment, because I think it's easy to look at all of this and file it under, it's another diet trend affecting the food industry. Atkins did it 25 years ago. Keto did it. Plant-based did it. The food industry adapted and moved on. But this is different. And the reason it's different comes back to something I said at the top. GLP-1 drugs don't change behavior, they change desire. Every diet, every wellness trend, every sober, curious movement relies on willpower, on people choosing not to do something they want to do. GLP-1s change the underlying want, the craving for a second beer, that pull towards the bag of chips, the dopamine reward that makes alcohol feel like a good idea. That signal gets quieter. And the current wave of adoption is just the beginning. Right now, GLP-1 drugs require weekly injections. They're expensive, often over $500 a month without insurance. That limits who can access them. I will admit, my doctor prescribed a GLP-1 for me. My insurance declined it. I can't afford the medicine without insurance. And a lot of people are, the same way. But there's pill versions coming out on the market now. That's removing the needle barrier. Biosimilar competition is driving prices down. Insurance coverage is expanding. And by 2030, JP Morgan estimates more than 30 million Americans could be on GLP-1 treatment, triple today's numbers. When that happens, the dining room reality that restaurants and bars are just beginning to feel will become inescapable. And there's one more angle to this that I find genuinely extraordinarily almost too good to be buried at the end of an economics podcast episode. GLP-1 drugs were developed to treat diabetes. They became famous for treating obesity. And now it's emerging that they may be one of the most powerful tools we've ever had against alcohol addiction. Alcohol causes more societal harm than almost any other drug. Drunk driving, domestic violence, liver disease, lost productivity. Alcoholism destroys families, communities, and fewer than a quarter of the people with alcohol use disorder ever receive treatment. A drug that people are already taking for weight loss turns out to dramatically reduce cravings for alcohol by a mechanism that bypasses willpower entirely. That's incredible. That's a public health story hiding inside a business story. The food and beverage industry is going to have to adapt. Some businesses will struggle. Some will find entirely new opportunities. The whole landscape of what we eat and drink and how much and why is shifting. But if you want one image to hold on to from this episode, hold on to this one. A bar on a Friday night, one drink on the table, and a person who doesn't want another one, not because they're being disciplined, not because they're making a healthy choice, but for the first time, they simply don't. Okay, let's bring it home. 3 things to take away from today. 1. GLP-1 drugs are producing a 40 to 75% reduction in alcohol consumption among users. A quarter are stopping entirely. Wine is being hit the hardest. The volume model for alcohol is under structural threat. 2. The restaurant industry is facing a projected $30 to $55 billion annual revenue hit by the early 2030s. Smaller checks, less impulse spending, and a consumer who wants high quality and high protein over high quantity. Fast food is taking the most immediate pain. 3. This isn't a diet trend. It changes desire, not just behavior. And with pill versions on the way and adoption set to triple by 2030, we're in the early innings. If you found this episode useful, please share it with someone in the food, beverage, or restaurant business. If you have a story from inside these industries, something you're seeing on the ground, I'd love to hear from you. You could email me, dave@beerinfront.com. I'm Dave Zalatoris. This is Beer in Front, and I thank you for listening.